Okay, so we're going to mix a stadium rock track together, and before we begin, I just wanted to show you how this session was left. Now, this is a song that was produced by a producer called Michael Smith, who I happen to share my studio with, and it's a band called Third Lung, and the song's called Scars. Now, how this has been left is basically at a monitor mix stage, and this means after the recording session the band might want to take something away and have a listen to it, and there's been various auxes and kind of a rough mix put in place, and this is where this session has been left. And if I was to start mixing from this point and from this session, I would get myself in a mess, not only because there's a load of auxes here that are kind of not my way of doing things, but also because we've got a bunch of tracks that I can't even see. So you can see that we've got a rhythm guitar aux, guitar wah here, and if I was to look at them, there's a load of hidden tracks that feed these, okay? So I could just show you these wah tracks, okay? And you can see that we've got a bunch of different guitar parts. We've also got the same here with some of the drums, and it's just not really a clean way for me to work. And not only that, but I've exaggerated this, but there's not all of the plugins available to me here. And this would mean that likelihood is it's not going to play back how it was left. So let's just have a listen to that. So this is basically on my portable rig, so it doesn't have all the plugins that our studio's main rig has. And because of that, we can see that a lot of them are inactive. So if I was to play this, it would likely not sound like how it was intended to sound. So let's just play that. So notice that things are clipping to hell there, and we wouldn't really want to be working from that. Let's just take off input monitoring on this print track and you'll see how it was kind of meant to be. Okay, so you can tell that the two things are very, very different. So I'm going to have to work hard to get it back to that point. And I also don't want all of these tracks to get in my way, and I would like to have this back in the sort of format that I'm used to, which this is not. So this is usually where my assistant would go ahead and prep the track. So we're going to go ahead and open the prep session. Okay, so we've got a prep session open now, and what can you immediately tell? Well, you can immediately tell how things are kind of laid out a lot differently. I've got my default color coding here where the drums are in that blue color. We've got a light blue for percussion, an orange for bass, different shades of greens for rhythms and lead guitars. We've got a pink color for lead vocals and a purple color for backing vocals. We've also basically gone through and we've made sure that that rough mix that was there has been imported into the session, and now at any point we can compare back and forth to that version, and we don't have any of those extraneous auxiliary tracks. You may have also noticed that some things have been summed down, like all of these guitars have now already been summed down, and this is something that my assistant would go ahead and do, is not only put things into the color coding that I like and the order that I like, they would also go ahead and they would sum things down, like guitar parts that have maybe been used with several microphones on the cabinet, and sum them down. You might also find that things have been gain staged, so when I play this, hopefully the level should be such that I don't have to mess with the levels too much to get it in a rough balance. So let's just have a quick listen. Okay, so there's a fairly good balance there already, and we can kind of work from there. And this is brilliant because all the faders are kind of pretty high up to near zero, and that is going to make automation easier a little bit later on down the line. So if everything was recorded really hot and everything was really loud, if I was having to pull all of these faders right down, it would mean that I had less precision and it was harder to automate because of the way that the fader itself is logarithmically laid out. And you might have noticed here that 5 dBs here is a much bigger movement than trying to do 5 dBs somewhere, down here. Okay, so that's good gain staging, and you can see that the clips have actually been kind of manipulated so that we've got that good gain staging without having to have the faders super low. Okay, so that's basically ready to go. And what I'd recommend is, if you don't have an assistant and you have to do all of this yourself, is to do this on a different day to when you're mixing, because the two things are very different mindsets. So I always like it if that once I start mixing, I can just immediately start with the creative stuff. And that means all of this prep work that I've just been describing should be done at least on a different day, or even better if you have an assistant or someone you trust that can do that for you. And the reason is that your first impressions, if everything is kind of roughly in place and it's gain staged, it's color coded, it's laid out nicely, that means that you get to really analyze the track straight away, and you can make better decisions, and you're fresher to do that. So in this case, I actually prepped this myself, but I made sure that I did this at a different time than when I'm now starting the mix. And what we're going to do to decide how we're going to go about mixing this is that we should listen to the tune. So we're just going to listen to it top to bottom, and what you should really do is make some mental notes, or even when you're first starting out, some physical notes of not only what might need some work in terms of to get it to where you want to go, but also what genre it should fit into and how you're going to go about it and what needs work. So let's just go from the start of the track and listen to the whole thing. Okay, so there we have it. So it's quite obviously a big power rock song. There's some kind of delays in there that are kind of U2-esque, but there's also some power that could almost be like Foo Fighters-esque in the kind of plodding of the bass and the power of the drums. So I think stadium rock is a good genre definition for this. And in terms of the song, I really feel like by this point here towards the tail end of the song, when all of these backing vocals have kicked in, it really needs to feel huge. So we're going to need to leave a little bit in the tank for this bit to sound even bigger than the rest of the song. So this would usually mean that this is the point I'm going to start to mix first, this point in the song where it's biggest, and then I can be reductive from there. If you start making, say, an earlier point in the song sound as big as it possibly can, then you don't usually leave enough space for this sort of stuff. Okay, so one other thing that's worth noting is where the problems are. So for me, there's quite a few frequencies in the guitars, and particularly these rhythm guitars, that seem to take up a lot of space unnecessarily. So let's just have a listen to those. So notice that when I take them away, everything opens out and it's just got far more space. So the likelihood is to make these other guitars stand out more, I'm going to have to kind of cut away some frequency areas or maybe compress things a little bit to kind of give more space. Notice how that the drums just opened up a bit and it all seemed a little less cluttered as well. So this is likely a place that I would start. Another thing that I noticed is that the lead vocal is already quite distorted. So let's just play the lead vocal in this verse part.
Praising the stars, flirtations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs.
So that seems like to me that it's had a little bit of compression on the way in, but it's also been recorded with a preamp that's quite gritty. So I might want to ease off on the amount of saturation I add to it, but I'm going to likely need for it to be bigger and even more compressed so that it competes with all the guitars. So another thing that I was doing while this was playing back was I adjusted the shaker volumes, and I noticed that the toms were already kind of a bit loud, so I went ahead and I panned these tom samples to the same position that the live ones were and dropped them down a bit. And you may have noticed that there are some samples in here, and when I was soloing around to just get a vibe of what was going on, that the samples are quite prominent, okay? And I guess that kind of modern stadium rock sound, you know, often comes quite a bit from samples. So we've got those there kind of ready to go. And I also want to try to get more out of the live drums. So let's just have a quick play of those, and I'm just going to take out the samples so you can hear what the live kit sounds like. So what you may be noticing there is that the samples themselves are what give the drum sound a lot of the ambience and a lot of the space. And, you know, knowing that this was recorded in my studio, it's quite a small tracking space. It's big enough to fit a full band in, but it's not going to get you that huge rock ambience. So that's why these samples have been layered. And I actually like the sound of the samples, so I'm not going to fight against them. I'm going to work into them. But I think it will be beneficial to try and get the drums as close as I can without those samples initially, and then add those in a little bit later. So I'm just going to pull those down, okay? And we've also got these as well, which are extra kick channels that have been sent through a Culture Vulture distortion unit. So let's just have a quick listen to those. Okay, so that's quite an interesting sound. It's obviously heavily distorted and smashed, but if you need a little bit more oomph or a little bit more sustain out of the drums a little bit later on, they're good to add in. And this isn't something that I do that often anymore, so it might be something that I leave out and then just later on, if I need to, I'll kind of add them in. And we've also got some tom samples, so I'm going to do the same thing there. I'm going to bring them down and we're going to start with them off. So let's just have a look through the rest of it as well. So we've got 3 bass channels. We've got a DI, a mic, and a distortion, and we've got that as a SoundZamp plugin. We've got 3 bits of percussion, 2 shakers on 8th notes, and a tambourine. So, now that it's been summed down, it's been taken from a huge amount of tracks, because there was big backing vocals here, to a much smaller, more manageable amount of tracks. And I always like to try and mix with channel counts of between 24 to 48 channels. And if I'm getting something that's 100, 150 channels, I'm going to make sure that my assistant or myself, before we mix it, we sum down as much as possible. So this was actually like 2 to 3 times the size before I sum this down. So each of these guitars had 3 or 4 mics or different room captures on them, and a lot of these backing vocals here had like 8 to 12 tracks, and they were kind of stacked very heavily and double tracked, okay, or quadruple tracked in some cases. So being able to sum those down makes the whole thing really, really manageable, okay. So we've kind of got an idea of what this song is and, where we'd like to take it, what it is. And I kind of feel at the moment that it's just a lot drier than it needs to be. And we need to emphasize a sense of space, because it was obviously recorded in a space that isn't as roomy as you might usually record something like this. So we're going to have to kind of work with that. But notice that we've still got this rough here. So I'm going to have a quick listen to what Michael thought was needed and the monitor mix. And this is going to give me a good idea of where I need to take it. And hopefully what we're going to find when I listen to this now is that a lot of the things that I'm thinking has already been done. And by the way, I haven't heard this track before today, even though I kind of knew the band a little bit. Okay, so let's just have a listen to this rough.
Share with me, there's beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me, there's beauty in those scars. We're not from here.
Okay, so it's very, very clear that there's lots of saturation, lots of compression, lots more top end in that than in the raw tracking. And there's lots more effects as well. So we're going to have to kind of play up to all of those things to get it to where it needs to be. But being critical of the rough mix there, or the monitor mix, is I would still like to retain a little bit more low end out of it. So when I was flicking back and forth and volume matched them a bit, I liked the energy and I liked the size of the space that was created in the monitor mix, but I'd like just a little bit more modern kind of low end punch to the drums and low end weight. So the kind of monitor mix had more of an old school kind of stadium rock vibe, whereas I think that this should be just slightly more modern. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start routing these.